Good morning, guys. Welcome to Chapter 3, 8 Mile and Hall. Now, before I start on this one, I do want to say this video is not going to be for kids, suitable for kids. So if you're going to watch it, please ask any kids to leave the room. They don't need to hear some of the things I'm about to share. As you guys know from Chapter 1, I told you that this video series book is gonna build on itself. Well, the first one was sort of a synopsis, a light synopsis, and to give you a general idea of why I'm doing this. It's about value and purpose, and it's my search for value and purpose, my search for home. And the last one was about our house on Lime. That's some of my earliest memories. I want to also remind you, like, it's not always going to be bad. I have a few good memories, not very many, but I have a few. Something I remembered after I finished last night is I'm like, oh wait, when we lived on Lime, I remember we were really poor. So as a treat, we would take bread and we would pour sugar on it, and we would eat that as a treat. And I remembered that about how we would take sugar and we would mix it with milk. We would have sugar and milk. And I also remembered, because sometimes you're going to hear the influx of my voice. Sometimes I have a tendency to either mumble or I'll start to talk really loud. It's because I have a ruptured right eardrum. When I was a kid on Lime, someone was playing with me in a basket on a bed and dropped me off the bed and actually ruptured my eardrum. So I struggle with hearing, and as I get older and with my medical condition, it actually makes it worse. So with that being said, this is Chapter 3, and this is 8 Mile and Hall. And Lord Jesus, I'm inviting you to help me share with only what I need to share with that will serve purpose in helping people understand what it was like in my search for home, in my search to find a place to belong, in my search to find value and purpose. I knew I was going to call this book Soapbox or Stones, but I wasn't sure if I should call it a search for home, a search for purpose and value. I just didn't know that I was searching for purpose and value at the time, but I did know that I was searching for a home since I was a little kid. I've always just wanted a place to feel safe, a place to belong. And I just remember constantly having that yearning of feeling safe. Because like I said, in Lime, we weren't safe. Even though my dad was there at the time, my mom's unstable behavior made us not safe. As much as I would like to be, and in the environment we were not safe. And the people my mom hung out with, we were not safe. So with that being said, I'm going to move on to 8 Mile and Hall. Now, 8 Mile and Hall, I remember very well. 8 Mile and Hall, it was actually, I thought at the time, like, not a bad house. It was a brick house, a cute little brick house on Hall. But the environment that we lived in was racially charged. We were one of only, that I can recall, like 3 white families in this neighborhood. And my siblings had friends that were both white and black. I apologize, I'm not trying to offend anybody. I'm just trying to authentically share my journey. But, and I realize, like, in today's environment with the racially charged and stuff, for me, it was actually the opposite. Oftentimes, like when I went to school, I was bullied because I was white. We were called names, even though we sometimes got along with our neighbors. The reality is that we knew what we were. We were what the world would consider white trash, you know? And so that sort of, I say that to say that that sort of was an underlying feeling that just was the thread that went throughout our lives when we lived on Hull. My sister, I mean, she was attacked, she was raped, you know, and actually by an African American man, she was raped. And later on, she ended up meeting up with that guy and beating him up. My sister, Judy, was attacked by a group of girls for the color of her skin. So, yeah, we were white and we were not liked for being white. And so it was hard. Though even my brother dated this amazing, she was lovely. I thought she was lovely, this lovely African-American woman, and she was beautiful. And I remember, I say all that to say, because I remember that instilling in me that I never, ever, 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 ever wanted to treat someone based on the color of their skin, ever. And I taught my children that too. I remember how crappy it made you feel and how yucky it made you feel. And I realize those are kids' words, but that's how I felt. And I just remember never wanting to judge another person. And it wasn't the word judge. I just remember, I don't want to be mean like they're mean. I don't want to treat people like I'm being treated. That was sort of my mantra growing up. So, with that being said, my dad still worked at Chrysler, of course. And again, the reason I brought up the racially charged, because I remember, again, being picked on a lot at school because of being white. And we had some things happen in our house because we were white. One day I remember coming home from school and our garage was on fire. And it had my dad's car in it. And someone from the neighborhood, I don't know, someone from the neighborhood did it. I'm not sure, but from what I recall, yeah, it was racially motivated. And we had those kind of things happen. The other thread that sort of went through our lives was the abuse that went on in our home. My earliest memories, I can remember, I have a sister just above me, and she's only 6 years older than me. She had a lot of friends. All of my sisters were actually quite beautiful. And so they had a lot of boys as friends. We got a lot of attention in our house from young men. So they were often there. Plus I had 2 older brothers who had friends who were guys too. Okay, couple memories I want to share also. Remember, I mean, I said that my sisters got a lot of attention and they had guy friends, and though one of the guy friends saved our dog, there were also things that happened where it wasn't so great to have these guys around. Like I said, my one sister, Joanne, and I say her name because I want to honor the fact that how tenacious she was, and I know she struggled with mental health issues like I do. But I said she rescued me from that house when I was hungry. She, like I said, again, my sisters were pretty, and she had some men in her life, and there was one guy, these set of brothers, she had dated both of them. But the one brother was lovely and kind and sweet. But the other brother was horrible. He was a horrible human being. And one time I used to have a lot of problems, I think, with my stomach and my ears. Well, one time I wasn't feeling well. And my sister, we were kind of broke and poor, and a lot of times our mattresses, when my dad was alive, I think we had like real beds, but as things went, a lot of times the mattresses would just be on the floor. And in this particular bedroom, the mattress was just on the floor, and I was in the bedroom laying on this mattress crying because my tummy hurt. And my sister Joanne, there was guys over and people partying, and which it was all the time. You know, when my mom wasn't home, there was always people there partying or whatever. So she came in to check on me, and she said she was going to go to the store and she was going to get me some 7-Up for my tummy. Well, when she left, this guy that she had been dating, because I was in there crying, apparently didn't like the fact that I took her away from him. I don't know. But he came in and he started screaming at me because I was crying, because my tummy hurt. And he literally picked me up as a little kid and just threw me against the wall. And I slid back down the wall and landed back on the bed. And then when my sister got back, she had gotten me some like 7-Up or ginger ale and some gum. And I never told her what he did to me. And it was funny because kids don't always tell. You would think they would. And I was pretty verbal about things as I got older, but when I was younger, we never told. We didn't say a lot. And I never told my sister Joanne what he did, because I suspect that if I had, she might have not allowed him around us again, because she really did try to protect us. I think all of my siblings did, and on some level, but they were also in their own pain and on their own search and their own journey trying to figure this out too. And so the difference between that guy who threw me against the wall and had me slide down and his brother is, this is how different they were. One day as a kid, I was playing with matches. And I remember being in the bedroom, and what's weird is some of our beds had mattresses on the floor, and then some of them actually had the little frame. Well, this must have been my mom's room, because it was a mattress that was off the floor. It had a box spring and a mattress. And I remember my brothers had bunk beds, and there were different times where we had frames and other times we didn't. But I was playing with matches, and I lit a match and I put it under the bed and sort of did this. Well, that little fine gauzy material caught on fire. And me as a kid, little kid trying to put it out, couldn't. Well, Hank had come in, and he actually had, if I'm not mistaken, he had like, his one leg was cut off at the knee or something, and he did crutches. But he somehow managed to flip the mattresses back upside down so that he could put the fire out, and then ended up putting the mattress outside. And he was never mean or cruel to me about it like his brother. And I don't even remember getting in trouble for that. One would think you would. But it's funny. I don't remember getting in trouble for that. I don't know if he covered for me or what, but he was so different than his brother. And, yeah, I just had to throw that little story in there. But getting back to it, Joanne and my brother Norm seemed to be the two that were what I would call the heroes. They were the ones who fought back and tried to protect and did their best. As a matter of fact, my brother, now mind you, I think he was like 17 at the time maybe, he had gotten a job as a bus driver. And we didn't always get a lot for Christmas. We didn't. My mom would decorate, and it was very white trashy decorating, but I loved it. You know, the sparkly garland and the ton of tinsel on the tree. And my mom liked Christmas, but a lot of times we were broke and didn't get a whole lot. Well, one year, my brother at 17, went out, and my brother is 10 years older than me, so I would have been 7 at the time, 6 or 7. He's 10 or 11 years older than me, not sure. Anyway, one Christmas, he came in and he's like, hey, I got presents for you. And so he brought us kids presents. And I remember that year, I think it was like the Barbie dream house, because it was like such a big deal getting such a really cool present. And I remember getting Don't Spill the Beans and Don't Break the Ice, and just thought it was the coolest thing. Well, he came in, brought us presents and let us open them, and then he walked back out, and then he came back in and he had more presents, and then he walked back out and he came back in and he had more presents. And at this time he was living, if I'm not mistaken, with again, the African American girl that he lived with, who was absolutely love or dated. They were, I believe they were living together at the time. And he just kept bringing in presents, and I remember it was like he was Santa Claus for us. And like I said, I don't have very many good memories, but I remember that. And so so years later, when he gave me that suit of armor, it's just apropos for him to do that. One year, as an adult, he gave me a cello because I wanted musical instruments, and he had told me, he had called me and said, "Hey, they got this cello here. Do you want?" I'm like, "Yes." And he's like, "Oh, it's sold." But he kept it. He had bought it and gave it to me for Christmas. Another year, he gave me this stuffed bear. It's going to sound so weird. He gave me this stuffed bear, and I was 16 at the time, and I named him Benjamin, and he gave me a bunch of bandanas at the time, like a bunch of different colored bandanas, because that's what I wanted. And I love that bear. I actually gave it to my guy best friend when he moved away. And he gave me a whip, and that whip was so cool. And I gave it to my friend who moved away, my best friend at the time who moved away. I wish I had that whip now, because we had so much fun learning how to use it and stuff. And he just was very thoughtful and protective of us. But yeah, there was just a lot of, and I know that if he had known what that guy had done to me, I think he might have taken care of him too, because he has a temper, and my sister Joanne had a temper. And remember I told you earlier that a lot of our siblings don't have the same father. Me and my little brother and sister, I think, have the same father, or at least me and my little brother have the same father. And I believe my sister Norm and sister Joanne had the same father. The others, we think, have different fathers. Well, not think, we know. You know, my oldest sister had a different father, because my mom had her before she married her first husband. And my brother found out when he was an adult he has a different father, and my sister found out she has a different father. And there's a question whether my little brother and little sister are really mine, but I know that I'm my dad's. So, but Norm and Joanne were, I believe, full brother and sister, and they both had a temper. As a matter of fact, some of the fights in our house could be quite violent. Like I said, when I say that my family got in fights, I remember them getting in some pretty violent fights. I remember one time my sister Joanne got in a fight with my brother, and like my sister like pulled a knife out and like, "I'll cut you," like, because she had to be tough. But they also were fiercely loyal and fiercely protective, and I just have great fond memories of those two, probably more than anybody else. My oldest sister would sometimes be the hero too for our birthday, and my other sister would throw me a birthday party, my 10th birthday party and stuff like that. And so, because my mom was notorious for not doing anything for it, she would say, "I can't remember your guys' birthday and stuff," but mostly it was because she used her money to drink. And so, or gamble. She was also a gambling addict. Bingo was her gambling of choice. But anyway, we'll get more onto that later. Okay, on with the story. And I don't know why I bring this up, but it's just a memory I have. We had like a 6-foot fence between our house and the next door neighbor's house. And the reason that fence was there is because he had a German Shepherd that was an attack dog, trained attack dog from the Army, and they called him Sarge. Well, from time to time, Sarge, if he was behind that gate, he was lovely. You could put your hand in there and pet him and stuff. But if Sarge got out, he was scary. And from time to time, and everybody knew, they would just yell, "Sarge is out," and everybody would run into their house and shut the door. Well, one time, Sarge got out, and remember I told you my dad had a white Chihuahua, Frisky, got out at the same time. Well, Sarge had grabbed the dog and literally was running up and down the street with the dog in its mouth. And my sister's guy friends actually went out and was trying to get the dog. They were trying to do everything they could to get this dog to drop our dog. And one of them actually picked up a tricycle and threw it at the dog, and that's what made the dog release our dog, Sarge, this German Shepherd. And we thought for sure that she would die, but she didn't. She actually survived, had a lot of stitches, but she survived that attack. But yeah, that was an odd thing. That another odd thing that was just part of the neighborhood and where we lived. I think that I'm going to start with some of the most traumatic things that I remember. And to be honest with you, my dad lived there for a while, but then I remember him moving out. He moved out and got his own apartment because I remember going there with my sister Joanne to see him. And like I said, my dad had close relationships with my 5 older siblings, even though he wasn't their biological dad. He was there. And my dad actually it was shortly after he had moved out, actually had a heart attack and stroke, and he died. He died in the hospital. And after that happened, I remember, going to the funeral. I remember my one sister and her friend from down the street had matching dresses on. And what's funny is I was 6 at the time when my dad died. So she's 6 years older than me, so that would have made her 12. And for some reason, all these kids seemed much older than me, but looking back, 12 years old, she was a kid herself. And I remember the funeral of my dad. I remember my dad's 4 brothers coming, and I remember one of them looking just like my dad, and it was odd to me as a 6-year-old looking at him and seeing such similarities of my dad. And I remember the smell of the carnations. I hated that smell. And they say, I want you to understand that the reason I bring up these things is because they affected me as an adult. These are all issues that affected me as an adult. I did not actually know it until many, many, many years later. We took a youth group to Detroit, to Pontiac it was called Day One. And we were actually staying in a motel. And when I had my friend she would always put this lotion on, and I absolutely hated the smell of that lotion. It was I don't know, flowery. It was just, I hated it. I would just be like, oh, every time she put it on. And I never really understood why. Well, when we had gone to Day One in Michigan, we had gotten off this bus, and as we walked on the bus, the wafting of her lotion came to me, and suddenly I realized it reminded me of the funeral of my dad. It was the same smell, reminded me of the flowers, the carnation smell, and that's why I ended up hating that lotion. After I figured out what it was, I hated it a lot less, but I could never figure out why I hated it so much. And so when I bring in these little interjections, it's because later on I figured out that it affected me somehow. But as I was saying, at the funeral, kind of a weird sort of sweet memory I remember, because 8 Mile is kind of big, and we crossed the street and went to this store while we were waiting at the visitation or whatever. And I remember the gentleman who owned the store was very kind to us, and he had known somehow that our dad had passed away, and he let us have free candy in the store. He let us walk around and have free candy. And I thought that was kind of cool, because I remember that even as an adult, his kindness to me. And I grew up to have that same sort of spirit where I just give things to people. and I do it. And everybody who knows me can attest to because people also give things to me. Like I said in the other video, I redo furniture, and a lot of that people just hand it to me and say, here. And I just remember that man being kind when I needed someone to be kind to me. When my dad died, I don't necessarily remember the emotions that I felt, but I just remember their kindness. Because once my dad was gone, whether it happened when he moved out or whether it happened after he passed away, just all hell broke loose in our house. My oldest sister at that point had moved out. She had gotten married and moved out. She was at, she actually at that point might have gotten married, divorced, and moved out. And I just remember her stuff being in the upstairs attic. It was sort of a walk-in attic from the main level. And it's the same attic that my brother jokingly would lock us in there and thought it was funny. And I remember being in the dark, and I actually grew up to be claustrophobic because I can't stand the thought of not being able to escape. But kids are kids, and they can be really mean to each other, and he was mean. Not now. He's actually the same brother who gave me that suit of armor. But they also, those same people would walk through fire for you. And so after my dad died, my mom spent a lot of time at the bar. Lots and lots and lots of time at the bar. Actually, I can hear my dog scratching, so I'm going to pause right here, go let my dog out, and I'll be right back. Real life. Okay, I'm back. I had to take my puppy potty. But after my dad died, things got really bad. My mom spent a lot of time at the bar. And like I said, she had her two friends. She had Dottie and Ethel. But somewhere around this time, actually, Dottie passed away. She had gotten so intoxicated that she fell down the stairs going into her house or out of her house and actually died. And I have to tell you that I felt like our lives were bad, but I felt like for Dottie and Ethel's kids, these sisters, I felt like their kids' lives were worse, because we lived off of 8 Mile in Hall, but I felt like it was a decent house, though it was the ghetto. Their houses, I just remember going in, and the smell, they were almost completely empty. Of course, I realize looking back in pictures, so was ours at times. Like there was very minimal things in there at times. But for them, I remember them not having like running water, and I remember there being rust and cockroaches, and I don't recall that in our home. I recall that in their home. And like I said, my oldest sister had moved out, and then my second oldest sister actually had moved out, and they ended up living together in an apartment over a bar or store or something. But one of these times that my mom went to the bar, she would take us kids. Sometimes she would take us to the bar, and we would have to sit there and eat potato chips. And sometimes she would take us over Dottie's or over Ethel's, and we would hang out with the kids. And one time she took us over to Dottie's, and she left us there for several days. Well, there was no food in the house. And I remember just being so sick and so hungry and just wanting food. And because I don't feel like we ever starved, even though we were poor, I don't feel like we ever starved with my mom. I really don't. I mean, sometimes it was government cheese and, bread, but we never starved. We had food. And, excuse me, but one time I went over to Dottie's house, and we were there for several days, and I remember going without food. and I got sick, and I remember just trying to get a hold of my sisters, my oldest sisters. Well, my sister Joanne, um, excuse me, had somehow or another, I got a hold of her, I don't even recall how, had come and got me. And she took me to her house, but I hadn't eaten like in days, and she fed me a bologna and cheese sandwich, I think, and I ended up throwing it up because I hadn't eaten in such a long time. Well, she gave me Pepto-Bismol, and they had this bean bag because it was back in the 70s, and I think they had this like checkered shag carpeting, like little squares. But I just remember that, and I remember laying there and falling asleep, and when I woke up, I felt better. Yeah, sometimes my mom would take us, and I mean, like, bizarre things would happen there. I remember we walked to the store one day with one of the kids, and then we were walking, and this guy started following us, and apparently he had had a reputation for raping people. And so as we were heading back to the house, he started following us, and we had to like run. Me and this girl named Penny had to run through this field to like get back to the house. And I remember another time we were at Dorothy's. This was at Ethel's house too, because Penny was one of Ethel's daughters. We were there, and my sister had said that she had gone upstairs and some guy was standing in the house, and she like screamed for help and stuff like that. It was just weird things. And I remember one time when my mom, because my mom would sometimes leave us there for days. This is going to sound silly, but one of the cool things I remember is I always knew, like, she knew, like, when she was going to go party or whatever. And I'm guessing it's when she got my dad's Social Security check, so I'm guessing it was usually at the beginning of the month. She would go to White Castles, and she would take us through White Castles and get a bunch of hamburgers, and I love White Castle hamburgers, so I remember that as a treat during this time. But one of the times she came to pick us up, and it was hard. Let me tell you, it was hard when she was drunk. But one of the times she came to pick us up, I remember she had this white, it looked like maybe a man's tuxedo shirt, a white shirt, or just a white button-up shirt. And I remember when she came to pick us up, I remember there was blood all over her shirt. And I would find out later, and I just remember knowing that something was wrong, and she was crying, but she was trying to hide that she had been crying. And I would learn this as I got older, but my mom used to go to the bar, and she would roll men. And what rolling men is you'd get them drunk, take them to a room, they pass out, you steal their wallet, and you leave. And she had a reputation for that. She also had a reputation for being a whore. And I don't know I feel like because her shirt was buttoned wrong and was bloody, I feel like she may have gotten beat up for rolling someone, or she may have been raped. I'm not sure what happened, but I just remember that yucky feeling? I said that's a thread that runs throughout too. This sort of racial tension and sexual abuse and just yucky, this sort of yucky feeling that sort of followed our family around. And it was hard. It was hard. It was really hard to know. One time we were driving home, and the two kids were in the car. And back then, I don't even think seatbelts were mandatory back then. But my mom was so intoxicated that when she went over a set of railroad tracks, the door of the car opened up. And I, as a little kid, remember grabbing the door, shutting it, because my sister's bottle had rolled out of the car. And I remember trying to protect my little brother and sister. I may have even tried buckling them in at that point, or me in, because there were seat belts, but they were just the lap belts that ghetto lap belts or whatever. But I just remember always feeling afraid, just always being anxious and afraid of what was going to happen next. Because sometimes instead of dropping us off at Dottie's house or at Ethel's house, sometimes she would leave us home, get drunk, and then bring the men to our house. I remember more than once waking up while someone was having sex with my mom in the bed. We would be laying in the same bed, and they would be there having sex. And I remember getting up, and there would be men sitting on the couch in a row waiting for their turn. Now, do I know or not for sure if my mom was prostituting herself at this point? I don't know. I would assume that she may have been, or else I can't imagine why she would do that to herself. There were times that, and my brother would tell me this, my SOA brother, my suit of armor brother, he was kind of our hero when we were kids. There's one time he got up and he saw that someone had Pauline on their lap, and he like pulled her off his lap and started yelling at the guy. And these were kids taking care of kids, because of the absence of my mother. Now, before you start judging my mom, I want you to understand, again, I'm going to reiterate this. She went through hell herself. She went through a lot of abuse, and she was an alcoholic, and the alcohol, numbed the pain, but it also fueled the rage. And so I think my dad's death really affected her deeply. Did she drink before my dad? Yeah, but I don't remember her being so out of control before my dad's death, though I know she was a drinker for a long time because I've heard stories. But it was kind of like that. And then sometimes our family would come to visit us. And I remember always being excited to see my family save two people, my grandfather and my uncle. The sexual abuse that we suffered, I don't ever want to hurt anybody feel that way, because I'll be honest with you, with people who are molesters, usually, or molested, one of three things will happen. They will either become a molester themselves, they'll become an enabler, which means they're passive about it and they don't stop it. They don't do it, but they don't stop it. Or they'll become aggressively a fighter against it. Well, praise Jesus, I became the third, because I'm an advocate for children, and it's come up more than once in my life where I've fought for children because they have a right to be heard, because nobody heard us. And I felt like growing up that people knew that the abuse was going on, but later as I got older, I found out there were some that didn't know. There were some that did, and those that did tried to fight, but those that didn't know, and they were blessed to not have it happen to them. But my family would come, like I said, my family would come visit. We were usually really excited. But one time my grandfather came, and I remember, I don't know, I was with my sister Joanne in the house, and she started saying, "Where's Lorraine?" which was my little sister. "Where's Lorraine? Where's Lorraine? Where's Lorraine?" And started running through the house looking for my little sister. And so started running through the house looking for my little sister. And I started following her through the house, and we go to the basement, and there's my little sister and my grandfather. And he has her arms pulled back. Now, if I'm 6, she's 4. He's got her arms pulled back, his pants are undone, and so are hers. And my sister starts screaming at him, screaming to let her go, or she was going to kill him. And I have to tell you, my sister had a temper, and she would have. Because my sister, I believe, had bipolar too. And he let her go. And then she's like, "Get the blank out of our house," and made him leave. And I never understood, as I got older, why my mom allowed us to be exposed to this man. I remember even going to visit them, and I remember seeing him inappropriately touching my mom, in the kitchen. and us kids going outside, me ushering my two little brother and sister outside because I didn't want them to be exposed to what I was seeing. And we saw a lot of that. There was a lot of drugs, a lot of alcohol, a lot of sex, inappropriate things in our house. And we as little kids witnessed most of it. And it was horrible. It was horrific. And I want to encourage anybody who has little children, don't assume that your kids aren't watching, because they are. We saw things that I won't even discuss with anybody. I've talked to my husband about. And I've been pretty open and honest with my kids about everything, or else I wouldn't be making these videos. But there's some things even I won't talk about, memories that I have. And with this house too, and like I said, there was parades of guys that would come in and out. And like, I remember one time a guy had a motorcycle, and I'm not sure which one he was, but he came to visit. And as my sister's talking to him and stuff, I had gotten up, and when I got up, I used the pipe as leverage to get up. Well, when I did that, my entire hand blew up like in one giant blister, and I remember when we heard, a lot of people didn't pay attention to us and could care less. And I remember walking around with my hand in a glass of water. That's how it was. I never went to the doctor or anything. I just stuck my hand in a glass of water, and that's how we soothed the pain. And because of that ruptured eardrum, I had a lot of ear pain. And I remember crying a lot because of my ear, because it would get infected and stuff. But there wasn't a lot of anybody to care whether we were in pain. And like another time, I was outside, and my little sister was out there, and she had the claw end of a hammer, and she's like hammering at this bush, and I'm not sure why. Well, I walked up behind her, and she swung it, and it landed, I'm not sure if, I think that might be the scar, landed in my eye. And it might have hit on the side, or it hit here, but I remember just walking up and down the street with this bloody rag in my eye. And so it, just things like that. It didn't seem a whole lot. There were some times that we were taken to the doctor because, like I said, my stomach got pumped, and I did have my tonsils out when I was 9, and I did have tubes put in my ears because they don't drain properly. And so I know there were times where my mom took care of us, but for the most part, we're sort of left to fend for ourselves or take care of each other. And there was a lot of stuff that went on in this house that should have never been there. Well, it sort of culminated, I think, it culminated on what they call Devil's Night. My mom and dad were actually married on Halloween. Why someone would get married on Halloween, I don't know, but I'm not to judge. Anyway, for a lot of years, I hated Halloween. And I know that sounds weird, but I'm about to tell you why I hated it. When we, if you're from Detroit, there's Halloween and then there's Devil's Night. And I remember, like I said, my siblings having a lot of friends. They were girlfriends and guy friends, and there was frenemies and a lot of fighting, even amongst friends. And I remember a girl named Chrissy. I remember a guy named Hot Dog, and Hot Dog was awesome. There was a guy named, I think, Mason, there was a girl named Tammy. There was a guy, I think it was Hot Dog, who had Keith. Had a monkey. He lived over on the next street and had a monkey, and he would come over, and I remember that monkey. And by the way, I hate monkeys because I think they're mean. So something traumatic must have happened with this monkey for me to hate monkeys. I've hated them as long as I can remember. Also, just like I hate, side note, this is a silly side note. There was a dentist, and it was like a house, and he was a street over. And my mom did take us to the dentist. I remember having my tooth pulled. She didn't take us to the dentist very often, but she did. And I remember having this tooth pulled. But back then, they gave you laughing gas. And I remember him putting that on my face. And there was this big, giant, smiley face. And it was moving around on the wall after the laughing gas. And I remember that sensation. and that sensation, actually remembering that sensation, because also at that time we had gone to visit my mom, and I was young. I was probably 5. We had gone to visit my mom, and or we had gone to visit my grandmother, and my mom was asleep in the bedroom, and there were little pills that had fallen out of her jacket, and I had picked up one of the pills and took it, thinking it was candy. Well, I'm guessing it might have been a Valium, because it was a small, I don't know if Valiums are small. I think they are. I've taken one once, but I remember it gave me that same feeling as that laughing gas, and I could not see straight. And I remember my grandma had these 2 logs at the end of her long driveway. They were, she had these big, beautiful pine trees that had ended up needing to be cut down. And I remember trying to walk on that log and feeling like this. And because of those sensations of that laughing gas and that pill, I never ever did hard drugs. I did drugs that sped me up later. I would do cocaine and crystal meth and speed, but I never did any other kind of, any kind of drug that made your mind feel like that. I just didn't like that feeling. So anyway, side note, that was a rabbit trail. Sorry. Thanks, ADD. But anyway, or ADHD. Anyway, it was Devil's Night, what they call Devil's Night. And what they would do on Devil's Night is they would go around and they would prank people. And there was this guy, his name was Johnny, and he had a GTX, and it was a beautiful black car. And I remember my sister Pauline taking us for a ride. I think it was Pauline or Joanne. He was actually, side note, a lot of the guys that we had come around ended up going out with or liking more than one sister. It happened a lot. It didn't happen with me because I wanted no part of it, but it happened a lot with my other sisters. Anyway, I remember him driving us around in this GTX, and it was so loud and so fast. And I remember that sensation again of feeling out of control, because everything was just always out of control in our house. It was just constant out of control, out of control. And I remember hating that feeling as a kid. I just remember, get me out of here. I felt unsafe, constantly felt unsafe. And that's a huge thing for me now. Like, if I will be authentically myself wherever I go, but it doesn't necessarily mean I feel safe. And I won't get comfortable until I feel safe. Comfort and safety go hand in hand with me. If I don't feel safe, I will not feel comfortable. And I end up oversharing or over talking or being overactive or whatever, or I'll withdraw and get really quiet and really subdued. There's usually an extreme I'll go to if I don't feel comfortable or if I don't feel safe, which comfort and safety are really hand in hand with me. But anyway, he had this GTX where was this other friend, his name was Danny, and they decided that they were going to race. And when they raced, I can't remember what happened, but this part I do remember. At some point or another, I believe Johnny's car was faster or something, so Danny asked if he could drive Johnny's car or something. Well, he had tried to do a donut in like the crossroad or whatever, and he hit a stop sign. And it did damage to the car, and I remember Johnny like chasing Danny, and Danny coming and hiding in the house and was going to beat him up and stuff like that. And I say all that to say, like, I don't know where the adults were. My sister Judy had moved out. My sister Joanne had moved out. My brother Norm might have even moved out at that point. So there was my brother Paul, Pauline, me, and my 2 younger siblings. So I just don't know where the adults were. It was just so weird to me, because looking back now, I'm like, if I was 6, my sister was 12. She's 12 years old, and these guys over here driving with cars, and what? This is nuts to me to look back and think how young everybody was. And anyway, like I said, all these guys would come hang out and stuff. Well, bring it back to the night before Halloween, and it was called Devil's Night. And what they would do is they would do a lot of pranks. People would do pranks. Some of the pranks were so bad and inappropriate. They would soap people's windows and stuff, but the pranks would get so bad that they would take and pour sugar into people's gas tanks, stuff like that. And so some of the pranks were inappropriate. Side note, I do want to tell you a little funny. I realize you guys are going to be like, seriously, but this is just a quickie. My mom, when she would get drunk, and our driveway sort of came up like this a little bit, just a little bit. We knew that she would get drunk and change would fall into the seat of the car. So sometimes we would go in the car and we would look for money in the seats. Well, when I was when I was looking for money one day, somehow or another, I'm not sure if I did it on purpose or what, but the car got put into neutral and it rolled back out of the driveway and ended up in the street. And so that's a side note. But what's so funny about it is that my daughter would later do that herself, except she got into the car to listen to music. She got in the car and listened to music, and hers didn't quite innocently go back. It actually rolled off and could have been quite dangerous and ended up on a railroad tie between our house and the park. And my ex-husband at the time had to like pop it off to get it was funny. Anyway, I'll get to that story later. Maybe I might not, I might forget to do it. But anyway, this particular night, and I remember people doing stuff, like not good stuff. I think that maybe someone even may have poured sugar in our gas tank at one point. But anyway, this night, apparently, people were pranking each other, and my sister decided to prank our neighbor across the street. And they were friends, but they would fight, just like she would friends and fight with everybody. Well, they were African American, and we were white. So with all of the tension that was charged at the time, because there had already been a race riot in Detroit that my brother Norm actually remembers being in, the riots in '67. He was there. He remembers it. So, but she had taken a stop sign and set it in there. How they got the stop sign out, I don't know. I don't know if it was the same stop sign that had gotten hit from that accident that I talked about earlier. I don't know. But they had picked the stop sign up and they just set it in their yard. Well, they didn't think it was funny. And so they got mad. And then a yelling fight ensued. Well, then from this yelling fight that ensued, they called people. My sister called her friends. They called people. My sister called her friends. And what started out as two young girls, 12-year-old girls, fighting, ended up being a line of people on one side and a line of people on the other. And yes, you guessed it, a line of white people on one side and a line of black people on the other. And it turned into a race riot on our street, on Hull and 8 Mile, over a stop sign being put in a yard. That's why, as I grew up, remember I said that, like, everything I bring up usually has something to do with my adulthood. As I grew up, literally, you can ask my kids, because the youth group used to pull pranks on each other. And I said, if the recipient doesn't think it's funny, then it's not funny. And you owe them an apology if they don't think it's funny. You don't get to decide for them what you think is funny and how you're going to treat them. If the recipient doesn't think it's funny, it's not funny. This is a perfect example of why. The recipient of this prank did not think it was funny. And because of their unwillingness to compromise and apologize and respect each other, it turned into a race riot. And when I say a race riot, I mean a race riot, okay? People brought guns. All of our windows were shot out in our house. I remember hiding under the bed. Hearing the gunshots. And at some point, my mom must have come home, because I'm assuming she was at a party and then came home, because I remember her putting us under the bed, hiding us under the bed while this was happening. At some point or another, halfway somewhere through the night, and this is weird, there was a girl. It was like an apartment upstairs and an apartment downstairs house that was next door to the people that my sister and her friends and them were fighting with each other. At some point, she stops, puts her hands up, and she had a little blue Volkswagen. I remember that because it'll become important in a minute. But she like put her hands up, came over, and got us. Got the kids. At least me. I remember her getting me. So I'm assuming if she got me, she got my little brother and sister. I remember her taking us, when she came in, everybody stopped fighting. They let her walk in. They let her walk out with us. Nobody fought while we were walking across the street. Everybody respected that, let us go across the street. She took us upstairs, and because it was the night before Halloween, she had a bowl of candy in her apartment, and there was a little TV, a little black and white TV. She set me on the couch. We watched that, and she left again. I remember waking up the next morning, because this was in the middle of the night. She came after they had shot out all the windows and stuff. I remember that her car had been tipped over on its side, the little Volkswagen. They tipped it over on her side. And in the meantime, during the night, my two older brothers were arrested. They also were released because they were underage. They were 17 and 15 at the time, or 17 and 16. And so, but, excuse me, what had happened was, and it's the insanity, you guys. I have a memory, and I don't know if this was the same night, but I have a memory of us hiding in a closet, hiding in a basement closet, because there was a helicopter circling overhead, searching for my sister Joanne. And I'm not sure why. I don't know if that's when she beat up the guy, because she came across the guy who had raped her, and she beat the crap out of him. Because I'm a little like that too. If you want to get into a verbal altercation with me, chances are you'll win the first time, but don't give me a second chance to come back, because I will have thought about it. And I'm a good verbal arguer the second time, usually not the first. And my sister, like I said, she was badass. She was a badass. My mom too could be that way in their anger. And I think part of it might be the bipolar. When you're raging, you know, they say that moms have the strength of kids. She did. And also, speaking of moms, my sister Joanne was a mom at this time. She actually had a son. She was young, 16, and had a son. His name was Steven. So he was in the midst of all this too. And I don't know that she was living at our house at the time. She may have moved out with Judy. Well, not may have. She had moved out with Judy. Oftentimes, though, kids would move out and come back and move out and come back. So it's sometimes hard to keep track of who was there at the time, because we all did that a lot. But I remember I have that memory, and what it was based on, I'm really not sure. I just remember it vividly. I can even tell you they had a pair of friends, and one of them was in there. It was either Margie or Mary. One of them was like in there with me. But I also, later when I would get older, actually would have to come back and ask my sister about some memories that I have of that house, of abuse in the basement. Sometimes we would have fun in the basement. We would get to go downstairs, and we didn't get stuff very often, but when we did, we got cool stuff. And we had pogo sticks, and we could pogo stick in the basement, and got roller skates and roller skate in the basement. And so there were fun things that happened in the basement, but there were also a lot of bad things that I remember happening in the basement. And I remember having memories of people hiding under the stairs watching the abuse happen in the basement. And I had to confront, you know, my sibling on that. And I found out that it was true. And they confessed, like, I don't know why I did that. But it was, a lot of stuff that was happening was based on fear. And so, because you did a lot of hiding when you didn't want to be the one to be abused. But you also tried to protect people too. But we were all kids just trying to figure this stuff out, because we didn't have any adults. And so, just by the way, I want to encourage people who think that their kids are more mature than they are. They're not. They need structure. They need structure with boundaries within a place of freedom, but they need boundaries. And I'm not saying that just to say that. They even, they have the studies where they took a fence and a kid and they put the fence close by. And as they moved the fence, the kid's territory to play would get bigger. They would use all of it until eventually they got to a point where they took the fence away. And guess what? The kid went back to the center where the original fence was. Because we are designed by nature to need boundaries because there's safety there. We can behave however we want, but we know the structure's here. And I was huge on that. There has to be structure, freedom within structure, but I need that structure. And I'm still the same way. Like, I need a plan. We can alter the plan at any time. I'm fine with that, but I just need to know, like, hey, this is the limit for which we will do what we'll do. Anyway, with that being said, after this eruption, they had told us, they said, you have 3 days to get out of that house because we're going to burn it. We're going to set it on fire. Now, mind you, it's brick, so the outside was obviously not going to burn, but the inside would have burned. And they said, you've got 3 days to get out. And if you don't, you're going down with that house. So with that being said, my mom got a U-Haul or whatever, packed up our stuff. And at that time, we had Frisky, still, our dog, but we had gotten this big, like, almost like a mop dog. It was just a big dog at that point. And my mom didn't bring it with us. She just tied it in the back of the house on, like, the wrought iron railing, the back steps, and just left it. And I remember thinking that the dog was going to burn with the house. And I remember being devastated by that. And to this day, the emotion that I feel when I see a dead animal on the side of the road, or any kind of animal abuse, or any kind of children abuse, the disenfranchised, it crushes me in my spirit, and I start crying because I just remember that, because there was a lot of behavior that my mom did. I remember feeling so much shame because she would, on hot days, because obviously back then you didn't have air conditioning and stuff, on hot days she would go outside in a bra and underwear, and she would just sleep in the backyard next to this beautiful rose bush that we had. And I just remember the embarrassment and shame of that. And so believe it or not, a lot of little things added up to big things for me. Like that introduced, like I said, the closet and Lee May introduced shame for me, and that dialogue in my head that would always run. And then watching my mom's behavior just continued to do that. And even something that simple, I remember remembering, and I hated it. And we had a back alley, and the people across the back alley had a pear tree. And I remember us climbing these things and stealing these pears off this pear tree. And even that wasn't a good moral code to have, because I would actually steal a couple times as I got older. Even though I felt it sort of a guilt and a shame about it, but I stole. I stole when I got older. I remember stealing from stores. And I remember one time I went, my mom had this friend named Leona, and we went over there, and she had change, and there was like a roll of pennies, 50 pennies or something, and I remember stealing it. And her son realized I had stole it and started to scream his head off at me, so bad so that my mom told me to go get in the car. She didn't leave, she just told me to go in the car. And he like came out in the car, and he's screaming and yelling at me and pointing at me. I think I locked the doors or something because I was so scared. Screaming and yelling at me. And one would think that would have deterred me for the rest of my life, but it didn't. When I became a teenager, I remember stealing from time to time from a store. I would never steal now, but I remember at the time, I even got caught at 11 years old stealing. Um, and the cop brought me home and stuff, and my mom could have cared less. And I was stealing for somebody else. I was stealing as a gift for somebody else. But just even something that simple as a kid, climbing that fence and stealing the pears from a neighbor's yard. It just, all those little things affected me so deeply as an adult that it's hard to shake. And some of the lessons I'm grateful for, even though it was really difficult at the time, I'm grateful for the lessons, you know. Some of them were hard to understand, like I said, about the smell of, even just the smell of carnations. And we've had a lot of deaths in our family. Some of them were closed caskets. Some of them were cremations. But even then, when my mom ended up passing away years later, I remember giving my kids a choice on whether or not they wanted to go in there. And I actually wouldn't, because I remember being forced to with my dad. And I hated that. I hated seeing him. That's my last memory. I hated it. Some people, they need it for closure. I didn't. But there's a lot more to go on. But that's sort of an introduction to what it was like as a kid. Because from there, we would move to what's called Love's Park in Illinois, to be near my grandma. But we moved a lot. So some videos are going to contain several moves because, and I say that because the house that I live in now, we own, but we moved in, we were supposed to move in near my 50th birthday, but it was actually about 3 weeks after my 50th birthday, which you'll hear that story later. But it was my 45th move in my lifetime when we moved into this house, 45 times. And so I have a lot of houses to cover. And, but I just gonna sort of pop around, and I realize it's kind of hard to follow because I bounce back and forth. But what happens here affects here. And so that's why I kind of bounce back and forth for that. But with that being said, this one's a long one. I told you it was going to be a long one. We're going on 45 minutes now. I hope that gives you an insight a little bit, though, to what we went through as a kid. And it wasn't just me. My siblings all went through it, too. And it manifested itself in different ways. And like, I'm also afraid of heights because my brother used to pick me up over his head and spin me around, and I hated it. So, but some stuff I've overcame and conquered. But I want you to know something. I love my siblings very much. And anything that they did, it was driven by a brokenness that was in them too. Just like I love my mom now. I didn't always. Because what drove her behavior was a brokenness that was in her, that was handed down from her father. And I imagine from generations behind him. Praise Jesus and glory be to God, though he had a different path for me and my children, and the curse was broken. And do I believe there was an actual curse over our family? Yeah. The hereditary sin was too deep. I know there was some kind of curse or some kind of invitation from the demonic into our lives that attached ourselves to our family, abuse, addiction, shame, guilt, fear. And praise be to God, through Jesus Christ, I'm being delivered from fear, from shame. I have my moments, but I know that my value and my purpose and my identity is found in Christ, not in what I've been through. And I got to tell you, for a lot of years, I walked around in absolute unadulterated shame of where I came from. Even the fact that, and I coined the phrase Detroit hillbillies because that's what we were. Even that, there was, in some senses, I was ashamed that I was white trash, and we were. And I carried that shame. I don't now. I understand that's a part of who I am, but that's not my identity. That's what I've experienced, but it's not my identity. And I'm not ashamed that my mom is from Kentucky and that my dad's from Tennessee. And I'm not ashamed that I love biscuits and gravy with eggs on top. And, you know, I'm not even ashamed of the things that we had to experience, the sexual abuse, the physical abuse, the emotional abuse. And my mom could be pretty terrible. She was really good with ripping people to shreds with her words. It was really embarrassing when you're a little kid and you hear people calling your mom a whore. As a matter of fact, one time when we were older, real quick, we had come and she would travel a lot. My mom traveled a lot. We went from Detroit to Loves Park a lot. She would get in the mood and we were gone. And she often drank behind the wheel. But I remember one of our many trips to Detroit after we moved to Loves Park. And I remember several times, by the way. We moved back and forth several times. But anyway, I remember this woman saying, because my mom had put a mattress in the bed of her truck for us. And she said, so you got your whorehouse on wheels. And I remember she said that in front of us as kids. And you don't forget those things. You just don't forget those things. And they can scar a kid and be their identity. Now, I'm going to go for now because I think that's pretty much for Hull. I will tell you, this whole series is not for kids. There are things that I'm going to talk about that they don't need to hear. Now, mind you, I shared all this with my children as they grew up. Probably too young because I do think it scarred them, but they're grateful for knowing. Because I was like a psycho mom about protecting them. And I even told my daughter, who's a new mom, I said, you know, she said, how did you keep us alive? I said, protecting you was my greatest motivation in everything that I did, like keeping you safe. That was my number one goal, was always to keep you safe. And because I was never safe. And so I was always searching for a place to feel safe. And this whole thing, there's going to be a thread of that through it. Feeling safe. I just want to feel safe. And the safest place I found is with Jesus Christ. He made me, that's when I finally felt safe. And I don't want to leave any videos without you understanding that's where I found my home. Ultimately, will be in Jesus. And we'll get there. But there was a lot of journeying that had to go to get there. So I love you guys. I hope this inspires you to search your own heart and behaviors that you might have that you wonder, why do I do that? And then figure out why you do it. Because like I said, with that lotion and that smell, once I figured out why I hated it so much, I stopped hating it. It didn't bother me anymore. Now I don't mind it because I just knew that I hated it, but now I understand it's because it reminded me of my dad's funeral, and now I don't hate it anymore. So with that being said, I love you guys. I hope you have a great day. Bye.